church planter can walk 20 miles in a day. Give him a bicycle and he can go 3 times as far and be 3 times as effective. Well, happy day once again. It's great to be together as we're continuing, as you know, our chronological study through the entire New Testament. I say that every time simply because some people will find individual segments on the web and they don't know that that's what we're doing, and hopefully they will decide to join us in this journey. Today we're in Matthew chapter 17, getting close to the end here, beginning in verse number 22. To keep in context, Jesus has just come down from the Mount of Transfiguration, where Peter, James, and John saw Moses and Elijah for the first time in hundreds of years, and then Jesus delivered a demonized boy who was having these terrible epileptic seizures. And so we begin reading in Matthew 17. I just want to read a couple of verses here. While they were gathering together, this is verse 22, while they were gathering together in Galilee, Jesus said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and he will be raised on the 3rd day." And then the last little sentence there in verse number 23 is, "And they were deeply grieved." Well, at least according to Matthew's gospel, this is the second time in a very brief amount of time that Jesus has brought this subject up. He's trying to prepare his disciples for something that, is shocking to their ears to hear about it, and it's going to be tough to go through, and he knows that, so he wants to prepare them as best he can. He already did this in Matthew chapter 16. Now, I like to take a look at the other gospel accounts to see if we can get a little more insight as to what he said and what was their reaction. Of course, the transfiguration and the casting out of this demonized boy in all the synoptic gospels. So if we go to Mark chapter 9 and verse number 31, look for another little detail here. For he was teaching his disciples and telling them, "The Son of Man is to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And when he has been killed, he will rise 3 days later." Now, Matthew told us they were deeply grieved at this statement, but look what Mark says in verse number 32 of chapter 9. "But they did not understand this statement, and they were afraid to ask him." So isn't that interesting? Put them all together. They're both true. They were deeply grieved, but they didn't understand, and they were afraid to ask him. And then comparing the third synoptic gospel, Luke, also chapter 9, verse 44, read this one with me. Jesus said, "Let these words sink into your ears, for the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men." Verse number 45. "But they did not understand this statement, and it was concealed from them so that they would not perceive it." And so you get even more revelation as to what was going on here. They were deeply grieved. They didn't understand it. They were afraid to ask him. And it seems, Luke certainly seems to imply that God was willing that they not understand it at that point in time. It was concealed from them so that they would not perceive it. And then he adds at the end of verse 45, "And they were afraid to ask him about this statement." Okay, so agreeing completely with what Mark had reported on that. So you can see how cool it is to look at all 3 of the synoptic writers and compare them and get just a little bit more insight. So the overriding message here is Jesus is preparing them, okay? And we'll see as we study out Matthew and then ultimately Mark, Luke, and John that a disproportionate amount of time in the 4 Gospels, a seemingly disproportionate amount of time, is spent on looking at Jesus' final week of his life and the events leading up to it, because that's the central focus of all human history. Okay, now, I promised you last time we're going to look at a supernatural fishing story, and that starts in the very next verse in Matthew, verse number 24. Let's read. "When they came to Capernaum," you'll recall that's that town right along the western shore of the Sea of Galilee, Jesus' kind of base of operations for a long time, "those who collected the 2 drachma tax came to Peter. And they said, 'Does your teacher not pay the 2 drachma tax?' I never noticed this until recently, but their question is posed in a negative sense. They were kind of implying, making this statement that they were assuming, anyways, that Jesus, their teacher, the teacher of Peter, did not pay the 2 drachma tax. What was the 2 drachma tax? It was a tax that all Jews were asked to pay. It was not obligatory, but there obviously were people that went around and collected and so forth and believed that it should be paid. It was paid for the upkeep of the temple. Well, big buildings require upkeep, and especially big religious buildings. And so they're just simply asking Peter, does your teacher not pay the 2 drachma tax? And then look what Peter says in reply. I'd never really noticed this. And he said, yes. Well, again, it was a negative question. They didn't say, does your teacher pay the 2 drachma tax? And then Peter said, yes, he does. They said, does your teacher not pay the 2 drachma tax? And Peter says, yes. And I assume, am I reading this correctly? Yes, he does not pay it. That's what Peter thought. And I don't know what the basis of that was. If you know this story, you know that Jesus proves Peter to be wrong, if we're understanding it all correctly, the conversation here, because he ultimately does pay that 2 drachma tax. I think as we read these up-and-coming verses, we'll see that Jesus made it clear that he had every excuse to not pay the 2 drachma tax, but he chose to pay it so that people wouldn't be offended by him not paying it. And you can understand, if you're trying to convince people that you are from God, in fact, Jesus was more than from God. He was God. He was the Son of God. For him not to pay the tax that is used for the upkeep of the temple of God, could cause people to stumble and say, well, how could you be from God? How could you be even a prophet if you're not even interested in the upkeep of the temple of God? Right? So it's really interesting how this story progresses, and as Jesus gives instructions as to how Peter's to get the money. You know the story, but I'm going to hopefully show you some details you maybe haven't thought of. So I'll see you next time.
HeavenWord 7 is made possible by the financial support of viewers like you. Thank you.